So as you all know by now, I am beyond excited for the Nintendo Switch 2, and I loved just about everything we saw in its initial reveal trailer. However, I still feel like there's a lot left we didn't actually see in that trailer. Sure, we saw the new controllers, but there was basically no mention of the actual console's hardware. At this point, it's pretty obvious that the Switch 2 will be a more powerful Switch, with graphical improvements and faster load times. Frankly, I think the reason Nintendo didn't bother to showcase this is because that stuff's not exciting and not what Nintendo focuses on, especially compared to like a brand new Mario Kart. What I'm more interested in though is how Nintendo will make use of this hardware through their games. They don't go on and on with stats, they just make their games look better every single console, and I think the perfect way to showcase just how powerful this new console will be is by remaking some of Nintendo's past games. Looking at the Switch, this thing was a port machine with just about every major Wii U exclusive becoming playable. That was obviously huge for the console. I mean, a bunch of the Switch's best-selling games are ports. However, with backwards compatibility, they can't just rely on simple ports from their last console to carry them throughout the years here. That being said, Nintendo has created a huge library of games over the years, and I think now is the perfect time to turn back to some of these past titles. I've come up with a list of 10 games that I would love to see remade on the Switch 2, simply because I think this is the perfect new direction from Nintendo. Instead of just re-releasing popular games on a new console with minimal changes, these are games that could heavily benefit from a major shakeup, making them truly feel like more modern experiences. I think the first example will help you understand exactly what I'm talking about, so let's discuss game number 1, Super Mario 64. When I think of games that absolutely need a remake, this is the one, and the irony is Nintendo has kind of already tried to remake this game. However, while Mario 64 DS is certainly fun and interesting with new characters, stars, and even mini-games, it brought forth a fair few problems of its own. Playing an open-world 3D platformer that was designed to show off an analog stick with a D-pad and a stylus just feels so unnatural, and honestly, I wouldn't really consider this that much of a graphical upgrade either. The reality is, Super Mario 64 is a phenomenal game, taking Mario into the third dimension for the very first time with fun objectives and a bunch of awesome, unique sandbox environments. It was absolutely incredible. However, it's definitely not the most polished game either. When you practically invent the 3D platforming genre, there will naturally be some things that don't age well. The camera's pretty bad, the movement can feel clunky, especially to new players, and some of the stars are pretty tedious. None of these things were very apparent back in 1996 because, well, people didn't know any better since there wasn't anything else to compare this game to. However, now that Nintendo has spoiled us with even more 3D Mario adventures, with all of them being amazing, it's a lot easier to go back and point out this game's flaws. The reality is, though, that the core concept behind this game of exploring Peach's castle and collecting all the stars still holds up incredibly well. Being able to re-experience this game with a great camera, smooth movement, and breathtaking 4K environments, this could unironically be the greatest 3D Mario game of all time. We got a taste of what a modern Mario 64 game could look like with the Mushroom Kingdom in Super Mario Odyssey, and to be honest, that's really left me wanting a full-on remake ever since. On top of that, there's just so much more new content they could add. We could get the characters and stars from 64 DS, but also some new stars entirely. Imagine a new floor in Peach's castle with paintings that take you to places from Mario's other 3D adventures. There could be entire Mario 64 style levels dedicated to Delfino Plaza, the Comet Observatory, or New Donk City. Another missed opportunity from Super Mario 64 has always been multiplayer. In fact, this was something that the developers wanted from the very beginning, but it just wasn't possible on the N64's hardware. Simultaneous multiplayer with Mario and Luigi, or even 4 characters, would be an incredible selling point. If we're getting remakes on the Switch 2, we absolutely need this game, and again, we can't just get ports of Wii U games or Switch games anymore, so I think this genuinely is the right direction for Switch 2. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is a game that many people will tell you is easily the best Zelda game of all time, and perhaps even Nintendo's greatest game, and like, look, I love 3D Zelda, even the more traditional 3D Zelda games, with Wind Waker being one of my personal favorite games ever. However, the idea that Ocarina of Time is front to back perfect is a joke. The game has certainly aged. Like, again, I understand if this is one of your favorite titles, but just to be clear, when I say it's aged, I am still giving it full credit. Ocarina is one of the most innovative and important games ever made, and because of that, it is literally impossible for it to be perfect with just how many risks it took. This is why I think it's so deserving of a remake. It's an outstanding game, but it's obviously not a modern experience. I think the Final Fantasy VII Remake is a perfect example of how well this game would work. You still have the same characters, general story, and concepts, but the worlds and gameplay have been heavily revamped. Taking Ocarina of Time's worlds and turning them into completely new pieces of art, giving the game's dungeons a few more modern puzzles, and shaking up the sword fighting mechanics, this game would still be Ocarina of Time fundamentally, but just a modern interpretation or like retelling of that game. What makes this such a perfect remake, in my opinion, is that people who have played this game can now experience it with a fresh lens, while the game is also very appealing to new players. With the success of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I don't know when or even if Nintendo will begin making classic 3D Zelda games again. Ocarina is already so beloved that a full-on remake of this game would instantly hit. Hell, Nintendo's already kind of remade it for the 3DS, so they know this. Imagine how well an entire reinterpretation of this game on a home console with next-gen graphics would perform. Obviously, I can't say whether or not this game would happen, but it just needs to. It makes so much sense, and we've seen Square Enix's success with their Final Fantasy remakes. This game could do wonders for Nintendo. Now for the most likely remake to come to the Switch 2, we have Pokemon Black and White. This will almost definitely happen in the Switch 2's lifespan. There's really not a lot to say about this game. I mean, we've gotten a Pokemon remake on every Nintendo handheld since the Game Boy Advance, and Pokemon Black is just the next in line. There's obviously a lot of different directions they can go with this remake, but the one thing I'll say is that it needs to be a better game than Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. By trying to be true to the original games, those remakes honestly failed to be interesting. If we're getting Pokemon remakes, we need to get actual remakes. Give us 3D environments akin to a modern Pokemon game instead of just one-to-one remakes with chibi graphics. Black and White are some of the most popular games in the Pokemon series, and I feel like a remake could be very exciting. It pretty much all just comes down to how much effort they're willing to actually put into these games though. Moving on to a game I would absolutely love to see, and I also think there's a good chance we will see, that is Super Metroid. We've already gotten 2D Metroid remakes before, with Zero Mission being a remake of the first Metroid, and Samus Returns being a remake of Metroid 2. That means you guessed it, Super Metroid is next in line, and this game is also considered one of the greatest Metroid games of all time, as it kind of cemented the entire Metroidvania genre. If I'm being honest though, after 30 years, again, it's not perfect. When I played this game for the first time, I remember thinking the movement felt a bit stiff, and after playing Metroid Dread, which is one of my favorite games on the Switch, I couldn't feel more validated. Metroid Dread is easily my favorite 2D Metroid, and seeing Super Metroid adopt this style would make me appreciate that game so much more. Being able to experience this game with immersive cutscenes and 4K visuals would be awesome. But one of the things Metroid Dread did best was really nail down its mechanics. Dread just feels so fluid on a Switch Pro controller. It really makes use of every button. A Super Metroid remake with more controller options tied to new gear, weapons, and fighting mechanics, that could make this game so much more fun to go back and replay, and could easily be one of the best remakes of all time. Okay, I know I've already talked about the Nintendo 64 quite a bit, but can you blame me? This console is just in a weird place where it was really innovative, but it's also aged quite a bit, and there are so many games that are just stuck on this thing forever. Donkey Kong 64 is one of those unfortunate games, and it's just a really fun, classic 3D collectathon. A lot of what I've said about Mario 64 also holds true for this game. Taking this game's chunky, ancient graphics and completely remaking all of the worlds from Donkey Kong 64 would make this game feel brand new. Donkey Kong 64 is also just filled with personality. Like, opening this game up with a rap song dedicated to each of the Kongs was just legendary. Imagine if they completely remade this iconic opening. There's some pretty obvious things they could add to the game, like new Kongs or multiplayer, but there's also just some quality of life improvements that are definitely needed. This game is known for having a ton of collectibles, but not every collectible is created equally. There's a bunch of different colored bananas, but only certain characters can collect certain colors, which is one of the most tedious things in the world to do when you're trying to 100% the game, and this is something that could definitely benefit from a repackage. I'm also just shocked that they haven't made a 3D Donkey Kong since this game. Retro Studios has been killing it with each Donkey Kong game they put out. I genuinely think it might be time for Donkey Kong to enter the third dimension again. As a huge fan of the Donkey Kong series, I would obviously love a new game, but a remake of Donkey Kong 64 would in my opinion be the next best thing, as it would certainly feel like a new game. Alright, this one might seem a bit weird at first. When I made a video about the Switch 2's new mouse feature, I talked about how a new Pilotwings could use the mouse as a throttle to control the plane. However, regarding the Switch 2's actual hardware, there's actually another reason I'd like to see a remake of this game. That is 4K support. Pilotwings is a flight simulator, and I feel like the appeal of a game like that is largely being able to view a bunch of different environments while flying around. Well, on a Super Nintendo, the environments don't look so great. This all makes me think back to the piloting game from Wii Sports Resort. Having a beautiful island to explore was an absolute blast, and I have so many fun memories with this game. Things like realizing you could travel through the volcano or trying to land on the moon before going out of bounds, these experiences are what make that game so fun. Thus, I don't just want a one-to-one remake of Pilotwings with a bunch of dinky missions and some graphical improvements. Instead, I want a game that embraces this theme of exploration. Again, one of the major selling points for this console will be its graphical improvements, and look at the marketing for any new graphics card. They are always showing off flight simulators. Nintendo already has its own flight simulator that dates back over 30 years. They already used it as a graphical showcase if you look at Pilotwings Resort on the 3DS, and a Pilotwings remake, especially at launch, could be a perfect game to get people excited about the Switch 2's new powerful hardware. Next is Paper Mario, and we already pretty much saw a remake for Thousand Year Door, but I think what makes that remake so genius was the fact that Thousand Year Door already held up really well. People really just wanted to play it on modern hardware. For the original Paper Mario, this game is fun, and it's nice to go back and replay, but it is fairly short, and I genuinely feel like we can go so much bigger. Just imagine the actual 3D exploration mechanics of something like Origami King, but with the charming gameplay of the classic Paper Mario style. Like with Ocarina of Time, this is not the same game with some small changes, but that is precisely the appeal of remaking this game. It's already on Nintendo Switch Online. If you want people to actually purchase it as a full remade game, you're gonna need to offer a little bit more, and I personally would love to be able to re-experience this classic Paper Mario adventure. I loved being able to play a modern version of Super Mario RPG on the Switch, and it would be so fun if we got something similar, perhaps even bigger, with this game. Now for another RPG, this one with a little bit more of a cult following. I'm talking about Earthbound. Yeah, this game is beloved by its fans, and I can see why. Earthbound is notorious for being wacky and also a bit creepy. This game is fun on the Super Nintendo, but just imagine this game now with all these creepy and bizarre undertones coming to life in a 3D full-on open world adventure. Seeing actual cutscenes for things like alien invasions, that would just be so sick. It's also worth noting that a 3D Earthbound game would not even be too far out of line, considering Mother 3 was originally being developed as a 3D game for the N64, so this is clearly something Nintendo has at least wanted to do for a long time now. Taking a 2D RPG series and converting it to 3D is also just something that's been done for decades. Just think of Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. Those games have already mastered the 3D open world RPG format. Earthbound is just a game that's become more notorious over the years, especially with games like Undertale making this obscure RPG genre more popular, so a modernized version of the original Earthbound, specifically in a claymation style that is just such a cool idea, could actually do really well in my opinion, despite the fact that it's kind of known as an underground cult classic. Next is F-Zero. Which F-Zero am I talking about? Literally just F-Zero. It might seem silly to remake the first game in this series when the newer games are better, but no, this is exactly why I want to see a remake. Again, when I talk about remakes, I don't just want a direct port with better visuals. A great comparison here is Punch-Out on the Wii. It's a perfect reinterpretation of the original Punch-Out on the NES, and it also very much embraced the console it was on with motion controls. A remake of F-Zero could easily embrace the new features of the Switch too. The mouse feature could be used as a throttle, there could be faster speeds, and having more characters on screen to showcase the Switch 2's improved power, and of course, just compare this game to the original F-Zero, and the graphics will certainly stand out. I understand even mentioning F-Zero is just like beating a dead horse at this point, but at least Nintendo acknowledges that this series exists. We've already seen F-Zero on the SNES repurposed for F-Zero 99, and the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe tracks do an incredible job demonstrating how beautiful a new F-Zero could look. If there's ever been a time for this series to come back, this is the best opportunity in my opinion. Okay, the final game I want to talk about is The Legend of Zelda. I'm talking about the OG gold cartridge Legend of Zelda. When I think about games that have aged, this is at the tippy top of that list. Call me a zoomer, but what the hell is this game? Some of the puzzles are just straight up ridiculous. Using a bomb to just open up an entire dungeon with basically no indication, how is this riveting gameplay? Honestly, I can understand why Nintendo had to use a helpline for their games, because this design is just stupid. That being said, I do love the actual premise of the Zelda series, and being able to explore a massive overworld and find all kinds of secrets, that is hype, and also the reason I want this game to be remade. There's actually an indie game called Tunic, which is exactly how I would want this style of game to be. Imagine the original Zelda in this more 3D overhead style, and they could even update his moveset with a roll, or modern items like the hookshot. There is a ton they could do with the Zelda remake. to the point where it maintains the same level of fun, although hopefully being way more fair, while basically being unrecognizable. It's not necessarily a game that needs like a 4K upgrade, but I mean, it would just be so fun that I couldn't help but include it on this list. But with that out of the way, those are the games I'd love to see remade on the Switch too. We've seen Nintendo embrace remakes more recently on the Switch, with games like Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. We could see a bigger and better version of this concept. Let me know down in the comments below what games you would like to see remade, and if you enjoyed this video, we've got another banger for you. It's on screen right now. Also hit the subscribe button because our biggest video ever ranking the 100 best Nintendo games comes out this Saturday. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.